They never knew each other. They still don't know each other.
Well, that sounds like a good trip.
It'd be fun, you know, we'll be up this Friday and stuff. Yeah, over. Everybody's got some, everybody who can has gotten posters. Here, you know,
Okay, it's just about 7 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and start. I'll try to talk over the noise from the projector. So, thank you for coming. I really appreciate your interest in the fact that you take the time out of your busy lives to come and join me here. I had a person last time, John, I'm not supposed to tell corny jokes, but somebody told me last time, she didn't really know a lot of stuff. You sound like a smart guy. And so my advice to young people is only give presentations on stuff that you really know well, that you got down pat. I know this subject well. We the people, the Constitution, the social contract, and you. I'm not a constitutional scholar. I'm a military historian, but I'm not a historian of constitutional times or issues. But here's the deal. I taught U.S. history and government at Norwich High School to 11th graders for 10 years. I taught U.S. history and government at the undergraduate level in the United States and Turkey. I taught U.S. government and policy at the graduate level in the United States and Turkey. For a year, I taught U.S. government and democratization at the newly established Iraqi Ministerial College in Baghdad during the surge to Iraqis who had never been in a democratic government before because of Saddam Hussein. So why do I mention this? This is not my scholarly area of expertise, but all of these experiences, trying to explain how this system we have works or doesn't work, has taken me 20 years and a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multinational teaching environment to get my head around this. I grew up, as most of you did, New Yorkers, leaving the high school with the idea that well, the American government works. It's not perfect, but it is the best form of representative government in the world. There's none better than what we have here. And that is a desired outcome from the New York State curriculum then, and a desired outcome from the New York State curriculum now. That young New Yorkers believe and understand how their government works, and also how their counterpart economic system works as well. Representative government and capitalism. That's a measurable outcome of our state curriculums. So I left school thinking all the good stuff about our system, why it is the way it works. So lately, as most of you have come to the conclusion that probably I have, things aren't working too good lately. And that's a common theme, whatever news channel you're watching, whether it's Fox or MSNBC or CNN or something in between. The things don't work as well as they used to. Well, here's the truth, it never worked well. It's never worked well. It's always been contentious. It's always been a system that has only worked when a couple of things have happened. One is an overwhelming supremacy in the legislature, and the other is when the president, for example, jumps ship from his own party like LBJ did in 1964 with the Civil Rights Bill. Surprisingly, a Texan, LBJ, abandoned the Democratic Party, more or less, at least the Southern Democrats, and pushed the Civil Rights Bill. Absent those kinds of things, FDR and the Depression, Woodrow Wilson and the Progressive Era, where there's an overwhelming mandate in Congress, otherwise it hasn't worked very well ever. And I'll tell you why I believe that is so. So this is going to sound a little bit like civics and a little bit like history, but let me start with take a look at the far right. Those are things you know about, the law of supply and demand. Why are oil prices so high right now and rising? Well, the supply is low. OPEC has made a decision to restrict production. you assume that people knew that for a long time, I think. Job specialization. Why doesn't your plumber fix your electrical box? Why doesn't your plumber work on your roof? Job specialization. Production is necessary to accumulate wealth. To accumulate wealth in the modern world, you need to produce something. Chenango County, we don't produce much. We don't have much wealth. Laissez-faire economy, that's a French term, let it be, that the economy runs best when it's unregulated. Now we understand this today. This stuff is not a philosophy until 1776 when Adam Smith writes this famous book called The Wealth of Nations. And that's the entry point to modern economics. Well, I call it the laboratory. The Wealth of Nations cannot be written until 1776. Why? Because these things have to provide the data set. Early industrialization, the age of mercantilism, trading, transoceanic trade, shipping, the commercial revolution, banking. Banking, as we know it, doesn't exist until around the 1630s with the Dutch. So all of these things are going on in the world of 1776, and Adam Smith puts it all together and publishes this book. So this is the origin of modern economics. Now I say this because the economic part of the Enlightenment is only one part. There's a social part, there's a political part, there's a number of things that are occurring in this era that are on a similar path. What is that path? The scientific revolution and the Protestant Reformation have allowed Europe to move ahead to develop philosophies and science and all kinds of things based on the scientific method. It sounds simplistic, but the accumulation of evidence, the development of a thesis, the idea that you have to prove the thesis over and over to validate it, those are the kind of things that Smith does in economics. It's political. Go to the left side of the slide. The laboratory that's existing in the end of the 1600s and the middle of the 1700s, the age of absolutism, absolute monarchs. Some of them are a little nicer than others, and they're called benevolent despots. Frederick the Great of Prussia, for example. Maria Theresa of Austria is one of them. But in England, things are happening that are different. The English Civil War, they cut the head off King Charles I. They overthrow the monarchy. Cromwell comes in. There's the Restoration after that. Then there's the Glorious Revolution and the English Bill of Rights. All these things are percolating, and the counterparts to Adam Smith, the political philosophers, the ones that are important, John Locke, Rousseau, and Montesquieu. I'm not going to hit all of them, because there are others, Voltaire and Diderot and some others. But three of them, John Locke, Rousseau, and Montesquieu, write books that, in fact, the founders of our Constitution and result in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. John Locke. Two treatises of government, written in 1689. The monarchy has been restored in the Glorious Revolution in 1688. So Locke writes this in a context of the overthrow of the monarchy, the establishment of a republic under Cromwell, the restoration of the monarch, and then the Glorious Revolution and the English Bill of Rights. And the major ideas that come from this sounds familiar to all of us because we've heard these words. Government derives its power from the consent of the governed. The people have inalienable rights, inalienable natural rights. That's where the word modern civil rights, modern human rights, originate with this guy. He doesn't call them that, but the idea that you are born with certain things that you have a right to. He calls them inalienable natural rights. He identifies three: life, liberty, and property. And the punchline of the book is when government fails to safeguard the right of the people have the right to replace it. So it's awfully familiar stuff. We see it, and I teach this to 11th graders, whether we're here or Iraqi civil servants in Baghdad. We see it directly implemented in the Declaration of Independence. You all have heard these words over and over. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another. And then here's this is almost verbatim out of law. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain, and here it changes a little bit, certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I couldn't tell you how property changes to the pursuit of happiness, but for whatever reason, there it is, the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's a very important phrase. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. So that's John Locke right in this. Now, this is not a constitution. This is a declaration. And there's a few more paragraphs after that about the words I just read, but then it's a long list of all the stuff that King George III and his government did to drive us to this point. So the point of the document, it rationalizes and presents some reasons why Locke's premise, government replaced, validates independence from Great Britain. It does not establish the United States of America. 1776 is not the birthplace of the American Republic. It's simply the point where we express our unhappiness and declare independence. It does not form an actual government. These words that I just read don't transfer into the Constitution. So when you hear somebody, for example, talking about what happened on January 6th, and they say, I have a constitutional right to change the government, that's not in the Constitution. It's in the Declaration of Independence, but not the Constitution. That's not a part of American government, not intended to be part of it. And very specifically, I'll come to that. So, in 1787, the Articles of Confederation aren't working out very well. We have a confederacy. We have no single executive. We don't have a president under the Articles of Confederation. We can't collect taxes. We can't coin money. We can't establish tariffs. If you commit a crime in New Hampshire and you want to be, Connecticut wants to extradite you, they can't even extradite you because there's no agreements between states. There's no such thing as interstate commerce. So this is not a functional government. All they managed to do is to kind of hold it together after the Revolution. It's obvious by 1787 that if we want something better than that, we've got to write a constitution. What is a constitution? What I would tell 11th graders is it's the operating manual for government. It's not a guarantee of anything. It's simply an instruction on how the government operates. It establishes the United States. Later, it won't be ratified until 1789. And it establishes a republican form of government. And it defines federal versus state powers. So that's what it does. It's written in 1787. Who wrote it? These guys. There are others. There are 50 others of their close and not so close friends. These are the ones that most of we historians associate with the document. The Federalists are largely responsible for drafting and ratifying the U.S. Constitution. This is going to reveal a recurrent theme as I go through this. The Federalists drafted this. Who's a Federalist? Federalists are people who generally favor the idea of a stronger, more centralized republic. They have greater control over regulating the economy. Looming large among this group, Alexander Hamilton, the most important in my view, followed by Madison, who's not as committed as Hamilton and John Jay from New York State. The anti-federalists prefer a more confederate system based on state equality and autonomy. What they kind of wanted was an upgrade of the Articles of Confederation. They didn't, going into this thing in Philadelphia in that hot summer, humid, dripping, trying to write with a quill pen. They didn't imagine anything like this. But the Federalists have a more persuasive argument. Thomas Jefferson, the most well-known of the anti-federalists, James Winthrop, George Mason. Mason and Jefferson, of course, are Virginians. Winthrop is a guy from Massachusetts. So this idea, this philosophy of federalism versus anti-federalism is not linked to states or regions. It's a function of what the person himself believed at the time. So Federalists wrote this document. You are all familiar with this, the Preamble. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty of ourselves and our posterity, who ordained and established this Constitution. So, what is the Preamble? This is the statement of purpose. This is your mission statement. You know, there are a variety of ways to explain this today to legislators. Mission statement, statement of purpose, all of those things pertain. I highlight the idea of we the people. That phrase doesn't appear in the Declaration of Independence. Does not appear in the Articles of Confederation. We the people. Why do I think that's important? I think it's important because Jean-Jacques Rousseau writes a very complex and hard to read book called The Social Contract in 1763. And he's French. So interestingly, people talk about the American tradition. The Declaration of Independence is based on the idea, on really the ideas of an Englishman, the Constitution, on the ideas of two Frenchmen. Most Americans kind of, if they ever knew that, forgot it. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau writes this, it's complicated, it's a complicated argument. The lead sentence, man was born free and everywhere he is in chains, is a famous phrase. He has some major ideas. One, that humans live in three states. The state of nature, savages, unbridled, a state of oppression, serfdom in Europe, for example, or in a society governed by what he calls the social contract. He submits the idea that the general will, and this is a phrase that's embedded in the social contract, the general will. I think a more useful phrase today is the common good. But the general will is reflective of the collective understanding of citizens' common interests. Makes sense. There's tension between the general will and the individual will. What works for the group doesn't make sense to me as an individual. It's okay for the group to get vaccinated with a mandate, but I don't like it, so I don't have to do that. There's a conflict. It's almost a Marxian dialectical approach. That there's inherent tension between individuals and the larger group of society. Rousseau says the social contract reconciles that tension, makes it better, and also reconciles the idea of freedom versus authority. How much authority does the government have before it intrudes on your freedom? The social contract attempts to get at this. This is complicated stuff. The formation of a legitimate state, there's no net loss. Because you have a government doesn't mean it's not a zero-sum game. Zero-sum game is game theory. Anything has 100%. And if I have 90% of something, there's only 10% left. So the idea of zero-sum loss, zero-sum game. Rousseau said that there's no net loss. If society's natural, if civil freedoms increase in a society, your natural freedoms decrease. He doesn't say this explicitly, but your total sum freedom is the same. It's always the same. Your capacity as an individual is limited by your own physical power, by the compelling physical power of others. What he's saying here is societies, groups, clans, tribes, countries, governments, families are better together than individuals. He would hate the movie Rambo. He would hate the idea that one guy can operate all by himself and do almost anything. This is a collective approach to society. And this is where it gets complicated, in my view, and very hard for 11th graders. very hard for graduate students to understand the social contract. The promulgation of laws, will by the general will, transforms this condition, so all the stuff above can be transformed, because individuals are guaranteed a sphere of equal freedom under the law with protection of their own persons and the security of their property. Good luck with that. So what the hell does this mean in our Constitution? This is how I would express Jean-Jacques Rousseau's impact in America. The Constitution expresses the general will of citizens in the preamble and the plural phrase, we the people. It doesn't say individual Americans. It doesn't say white men. It doesn't say individuals. It says we the people. The general will of society outweighs the individual will of a citizen. This is almost that Star Trek thing where Spock dies and he puts his hand up and he says to Kirk as he dies in that capsule thing, the will of the many outweighs, no, the good of the many outweighs the good of the few. I wish I had a picture of Leonard Nimoy. The Constitution, so that's Rousseau in our Constitution, the social contract. In all societies, people, you give up some of your freedoms to live in a society. If you don't, you're going to be outside society. You're going to have to be a hermit or something, live off the grid. Even people who live off the grid have got to come in to get salt and oranges. If you're living off the grid and not Upton, you can't grow orange. You're going to need, you don't want to get screwed. So even people off the grid today rely on society to some extent. Nobody stands alone as a human. It was his major argument. The Constitution establishes the structure and operation of what Rousseau would call legitimate government. A government that exists to fairly and equitably institute laws among its citizens. There are only 7 articles in the Constitution. The ones that are the most important, Articles 1, 2, and 3, are structural. This is the operating manual of our government. The one they deal with first, and which I think is probably most important in their minds, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. So this is a structural document about how to organize and set up the government, and then explains how it's run. What are terms of offices? How long do you stay in Congress? How do we elect, or how do we nominate Supreme Court justices? Where do these ideas come from? This is one of my favorite things to talk to 11th graders about, Republican government. Charles Baron de Montesquieu writes this book called The Spirit of the Laws in 1748. And it's all about a republic, all about Republican government. Now, if I say that
Oh my God!
999 out of
You're such a
1,000, maybe even more in America,
Oh my God,
is
come
a
on.
republic a democracy?
Oh,
Is a democracy a republic? They'll say they're the same. If I say, what's a republic to most Americans, they say, oh, it's a democracy.
It's a democracy.
A republic.
That's the stuff.
And Montesquieu starts with his explanation of
Okay,
the Roman
did you
Republic.
want to come out and
The
grab?
first republic in human history. What's a republic? A republic is a system that has checks and balances. In the Roman Republic, only the patricians, the nobility, could be in the Senate and enact laws. So 1% of the people of ancient Rome in the republic period, before the empire, before Caesar and Augustus and all those guys, only the nobles could pass laws. But the other 99%, the people they call the plebeians, could elect tribunes. The tribunes had the power to veto the laws. So the operative notion in the Roman Republic is that the power of the nobles could be checked by the power of the plebeians, only to the extent of canceling laws. The plebeians couldn't make laws. They couldn't run the government, but they could veto things. So this is what a republic is. Modern republics, 3 to 4 branches. We have 3 branches. Well, guess what? Iraqis, the 4 Iraqis got 4. Think about that. They got 4 branches. How was that? The people are represented either directly, the direct democracy, or indirect democracy. We have an indirect democracy. We vote for representatives. So somehow the people are represented. Checks and balances. This is the expression I'm going to come back to. And usually through the veto. So these are the defining functions of modern republics. Now, Republican government is not the same as democracy. Rome, well, let me start with Britain. Britain is a democracy, but it's not a republic. They don't have a written constitution. British government and judicial systems are a matter of a number of documents and tradition. In any case, in Britain, there's no formal, there's no way for the laws of Parliament to be negated by the judiciary. They don't have a system of checks and balances. So Britain's a democracy, it's not a republic. Ancient Rome was a republic, but it was not a democracy. Nobody could vote in ancient Rome, except for the 1% of the patricians who happen to be in the Senate. So they're not the same thing. So we have this, by design, this Republican government, 3 branches of government, and you know this. This is what often gets lost on most Americans. It's a system that's intentionally designed to obstruct and prevent, and the word that's used in the literature is the tyranny of the majority. That word is not mentioned in the Constitution. It is mentioned in the Federalist Papers as the reason why we want 3 branches of government. To avoid the bulk of the people oppressing a minority, the system is designed to have overlapping checks and balances. It is not designed to work well. It's designed to obstruct. It's a system that's constructed for a pre-industrial agrarian society. It's a creation of 13 colonies that don't even have a road system that connects Maine to Florida. There is no interstate commerce on land. There are local jurisdictions. There's a lack of connectivity. So this is the kind of system that they come up with. To obstruct, to block, to halt. I don't really need to go into this, I don't think. You know, the Senate and the House make laws. They can be vetoed by the President. The Senate and the House can then have a supermajority and overrule the President. It can then go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will determine whether or not the law is constitutional. To begin with, they can throw it out, can negate the law entirely. So this complicated system of checks and balances, it's never worked well. It's only worked well in 2 or 3 periods in our history. How is it that President Johnson can get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments passed that make ex-slaves, blacks, citizens, that enfranchise them and give them the right to vote? The only reason that passes in 1866 to 1867 is the fact that the ex-Confederate states are not in Congress. You've only got the northern states in Congress. That's it. So unique things have made this work periodically. Why isn't it working today? I go back to the first Congress. They didn't have political parties when they wrote this. In 1787, there are no political parties. There aren't political parties as we know them today really until 1800, with Jefferson, the 3rd president. Adams kind of gets it going. There are quasi-parties under John Adams. But the idea that political parties will arise in America that will have such different ideas doesn't occur to these, I don't think it occurs to these people in 1787 when they write the Constitution. The first Congress has only 59 members in the House. Today there's 435. How hard is it to get agreement from 435 people as opposed to 59? The Senate today has 100 members. How hard is it to get consensus with 100 people versus 22? So the scale of our government, did the framers of the Constitution think that we would have 50 states? I don't think so. We don't buy Louisiana till 1803. You know, could they even imagine? We've got 13 states, they went to 15 pretty quickly, maybe 20, 22 states altogether, but beyond that, it was incomprehensible. Lewis and Clark, you know, that stuff is all future tense. So this thing, the scale of this seemed to work for a while, but it very quickly breaks down. The size of the houses itself is an obstruction. Why 435? It's just a number. It's been that way since 1912. Congress could change it tomorrow. It's interesting that the Senate will always be balanced in the Constitution. There are 2 senators for every state. Doesn't matter if you have 50 states or 1,000. It's always going to be divisible by 2. The House, they have wisely, in my view, chosen a number that's an odd number. So there's always a majority in the House if they're all present in some way, shape, or form. It's one of the reasons things don't work well. So the amendments, how do we change it? Supermajority, both houses, 2/3, and then a vote by the state's legislators to ratify the amendment of 3/4 of the states. So will we ever have another amendment to the Constitution? Think about this. You got to get both houses of Congress to have supermajorities in both houses, followed by 3/4 of the states. I don't think we're ever going to have an amendment ever again. I don't see it. I don't see an equal rights amendment ever being passed. I'm going to talk about the Second Amendment. Why the Second Amendment? There are 2 Supreme Court cases coming up really quickly in November that we're going to look at and are very important. One is a gun case, a Second Amendment case. 2 guys from Syracuse don't think that New York State should be allowed to regulate concealed carry. You've got to apply for a license, you've got to be vetted, it's got to be approved. That's one of the cases. The other is an abortion case. So I'm going to talk about amendments and tie this together using the Second Amendment. The amendments, there are, I forget, 27 of them today. The first 10 are called the Bill of Rights, which is odd because they don't really talk about the rights of individuals. What they talk about in most of the amendments, 9 out of 10, is what the government can't do. The government can't impose, can't specify a religion. The government can't block your freedom of expression. So it's I'm not sure it really is the right word, Bill of Rights. But the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This is the Supreme Court. There they are. Right now it's 6-3. One of the things that the framers did not imagine in 1787 was the political process, the idea that the Supreme Court would be so heavily politicized. That's not how they thought at the time. You can pretty much get a good idea if you read all of the 89, 87, whatever they are, Federalist Papers, but this idea does not come up. But yet today there are 6 conservative justices and 3 liberal justices. It's been 9 members since 1869. When the country began, there were about 4 million people, 700,000 of which are slaves. 1869, the last time we changed the number of the Supreme Court justices, there were only 38 million Americans. Today there's over 340 million Americans. There's a limit, I think, as to how much work 9 people can ever do, even if they hire countless clerks. I think the number of cases, and maybe somebody here knows better than I do, but I think the number of cases per term is 24. They can only take 24 cases. So 24 cases, 1869, that's probably about it. Today they've got to refuse probably more cases than they take. Could we expand the Supreme Court? Sure. It's a simple act by Congress. The Senate alone can change the number of justices. So would this help? I don't know. It's 6-3 right now. Originalism. The idea that whenever the Supreme Court interprets the law and looks at the Constitution, It aims to follow how the Constitution would have been understood and intended as it was to be understood at the time it was written. The most well-known advocate of this principle is Justice Scalia, who died a few years ago. He was an ardent advocate of originalism. Now, what's Ed's view of Justice Scalia? He used originalism to advance political agendas. He didn't really stick to originalism as he expressed it as a principle. The most well-known gun case, Second Amendment case, is D.C. versus Heller in 2007, where the District of Columbia loses the ability to regulate the purchase and ownership of handguns in private homes on a 5-4 decision. Scalia writes the majority opinion. That's a 44-page opinion. I've read it. I went back and reread it just this week for this lecture. 44 pages. Historical cases. How language was expressed in 1787. But Scalia he's unequivocally carried the idea of to bear arms, unequivocally carry a military meaning only when followed by the preposition against. So that's what Scalia said to justify his part of the 44-page Heller versus D.C. Now, this is something that I've only come to realize really in this past year. The Constitution as prose, as a narrative expression of some substance. For an 18th century document, there is unusual clarity and precision in the prose used in the Constitution. 10th graders, 11th graders can read this darn thing and understand it. They can't read Edmund Burke. They can't read Tom Paine's Common Sense. They can read it, they can't understand it. I can't understand part of it. Nobody can understand Adam Smith very well. It's like reading Marx or Hitler. The prose is so obscure, so obtuse. You can't wade through it to get to the point. Look at the literature. William Makepeace Thackeray, even William Defoe, Daniel Defoe. Hard to read. This is hard to read. The Constitution is not hard to read. Look at this one. Let's talk about the gun thing and militia. There are parts of the Constitution that are what we call, in the articles, enumerated powers. What's the Congress empowered to do? What is the President empowered to do? What's the Supreme Court empowered to do? These are called the enumerated powers. Article 1 is the legislature. So the enumerated powers in Article 1 are reserved for the Congress. Declare war. That's a hot topic now. Only the Congress can declare war. Gets back to my last lecture. Well, what the hell is a war? Well, how would we be fighting in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan for years and years and years without declaring war? But there it is, crystal clear in the enumerated powers to declare war. That's it. So this is such an unusual thing for the late 18th century. I didn't realize this really until just recently. They feared a standing army. They viewed a standing army as an instrument of oppression. The redcoats, the lobsterbacks, the people who had done the Boston Massacre, the people that General Gage had quartered in your house, those guys, the redcoats. So they didn't want a standing army. Okay, to have a navy. We'll maintain a navy. The navy's out there at sea, bothers. But a standing army is raised and supported, but only for 2 years. They hated the idea of a standing army. The portions that are relevant to the Second Amendment, to provide for the calling forth of the militia, to do what? Not to free the American polity from tyranny of its own government, but to enforce the laws of the Union, to suppress insurrections and repel invasions. What about the militia? The Congress organizes and arms it. Congress. The militia in colonial America, they didn't own their own weapons. There's this mythology of the Minuteman taking the gun from above his mantle and going out to fight at Lexington and Concord after Paul Revere warns them that they're coming. They were coming to collect the weapons that were stored in the magazines, the modern word is armories, stored in the magazines and armories at Lexington and Concord. Those were government-owned weapons. The militia, people didn't own military-grade weapons. They didn't own a Brown Bess musket. It cost too much money. These are people that had one pair of shoes, one coat in the winter. Nobody owned books unless they had a manor like Washington or Jefferson. These people had nothing. Weapons cost an enormous sum of money in colonial America. Only the government could afford to buy numbers of what they call the Tower musket, the famous Brown Bess, and kept in very controlled circumstances in magazines. So this is explicit, organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia to do these things. That's what it says. The Second Amendment comes almost exclusively from Federalist Paper number 29, written by, you'll guess, Alexander Hamilton. The whole point of Federalist Paper number 29 is that a standing army is a dangerous thing. A standing army is dangerous to live with. As Hamilton goes through this, and again, you have to read through it. This is clumsy prose. All the Federalist Papers are. An organized militia is the only substitute devised to render a standing army unnecessary. We don't need a standing army. We can have one for 2 years if we really need to fight off somebody. But it's unnecessary because we have a militia. He goes on to say that the militia can't simply be a small group of people. It can't be a select corps. It can't be people you choose for the militia. Because they may be rendered subservient to the views of arbitrary power. If you're selecting a small group of people as your militia and they think like you, the militia can then be used to execute your policies and oppress the public. The part I like, that I think is most important, a little more can reasonably aimed at with respect to the people at large. So in Federalist Papers number 29, he doesn't talk about individuals. He talks about the militia is made up of the people at large, the plural. And to have them properly armed and equipped, and in order to see that this is not neglected, it should be necessary to assemble them once or twice in the course of the year. So we see this concept in the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of the free state, the right of the people, the plural, the people, to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Here's what I call the Second Amendment dilemma, where originalists, where the 44-page opinion, that's about 30 pages of the 5 justices and the 14 pages of the dissenting opinion. This is where I think they go wrong, personally. I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I'm a military historian. This is my wheelhouse. It's conditional. It's restricted. It doesn't say anything about what most of us think the Second Amendment says. It's conditional. It's conditional to a well-regulated militia. The circumstances are restricted, that it's necessary for the security of a free state. Nothing in here about militia members having an insurrection to change the tyrannical government on 6 January. The people may keep and bear arms. The people, the plural, people, keep and bear arms. Where did the militia, what's a keeping room in a colonial house? It's a common room. What's a keep in a hospital, in a castle in medieval Europe? It's a common area. So I don't know how Scalia gets around this, to be honest. What's not mentioned at all? Individual rights, individual gun ownership, not mentioned. Not mentioned. Very few people in colonial America owned guns. We know that as a fact today. That is a fact. They're too expensive. They didn't need guns. They were in a farming community. Who needed some weapons on the fringe of the frontier, where there were Indian and Native American incursions? So on the fringe of the frontier, they needed some weapons. Kentucky long rifles is a reflection of that. Defense of your own home, property, or against tyranny. Not mentioned at all. Nothing in the Constitution about about defending your own home, your own property, your own safety. Why do militia exist? Repel invasions, put down insurrections, enforce the laws. Carrying a gun for personal protection, not mentioned. Resisting the laws of your own government, not mentioned. And a definition of arms. I think Scalia was wrong on his definition. Arms meant military-grade weapons. We're talking about a brown vest, tower, musket. So the question I would ask students is what constitutional authorities about militias or arms are explicitly reserved to individual citizens? And the answer is, frankly, is none. It's not in the Constitution. Now, they wrote that thing really well. I think, as Scalia also advanced the idea, they intended that the words meant something. And I think the words of the Second Amendment are clear. Now, let me just bring in the local thing very quickly, kind of wind this up. You may have seen Tom Holmes had some interesting discussions with these people out in the park a couple years ago. The Lightfoot Militia, a local upstate New York group of homegrown, self-organized militia that call themselves the New York Lightfoot Militia. Is a constitutional militia that supports a constitutional government. Really? I just read you just saw the enumerated powers. You just saw the Second Amendment. Where does that come from? This is the part that intrigues me. Right here. Join and visit their webpage on Facebook. You must answer the questions to be considered for vetting. I tried to find this on Facebook, it's been taken down. I don't think they want the people. I don't think they want people like me. I know how to handle a gun. I spent 27 years in the Army. But I don't think they want Ed Erickson. I think they want to vet people. This is the front, this is the backside of their recruiting literature. Morals, values, purpose. How strong is your drive to protect yourself from evil? What is evil? Why do we exist? So this is a propagandized product that frankly merges the ideas of the Declaration of Independence and some of the ideas, erroneously in my view, of the Constitution. You might remember this. This happened on January 31st, 2020. At the Second Amendment meeting in Norwich. I tried to count the women in the group. I think I came up with 5 or 6 women. There's no blacks. There's nobody there that I really recognize as being a definable minority. I don't see a yarmulke. I don't see a hijab. I don't see minorities. But supposedly 1,500 people, I don't know if that's true or not, but a petition was submitted to the County Board of Supervisors to declare Chenango County a gun rights sanctuary. What does that mean? That means that the county sheriff, law enforcement, would not enforce state and federal laws on firearms, in particular the SAFE Act. So what this is similar to the sanctuary cities for immigrants, where they refuse to implement federal immigration laws against illegal immigrants. So this petition was submitted to the County Board of Supervisors. They I think tabled it initially, and then finally it just went away. So this has never ever been seriously considered in Chenango County. Would a Chenango County gun rights sanctuary motion be made in our county? I don't know. I'm glad it wasn't. Now, what do I teach 11th graders? That. You can't nullify it. Sanctuary cities, gun rights sanctuaries are unconstitutional. They are, in my view, one and the same. They are anti-American. I don't like sanctuary cities any more than I like gun rights counties. For this reason, in 1832, the federal government passed tariffs. the southern cotton states imported far more than the northern states, which imposed the tariffs. And the South Carolinians have a nullification ordinance that says we don't have to obey federal laws. Andrew Jackson took them to the mat. Andrew Jackson forced or persuaded Congress to pass the force bill and sent the U.S. Army getting them ready to invade South Carolina. They backed off. They blinked. So Johnson Calhoun blinked, and they then negated their own ordinance of nullification. It's a seminal point in American history. And this thing pops up on the U.S. History and Government Regents about every third year. The nullification thing. The idea that the federal government established the primacy, the Constitution establishes the primacy of federal law over state and local law. So what do I think about gun rights sanctuaries? I think in our history, there's an argument that any sanctuary cities and gun rights sanctuaries are unconstitutional. You can't negate or nullify federal law. Now, we're knee-deep in the marijuana thing. So we have states now that have basically nullified federal statutes on the use of marijuana. So I don't know where we're going with this as a country these days. All right, so I'm basically out of time. I call this an American tragedy. I like Theodore Dreiser's novel title, An American Tragedy. This is our political dilemma, and it's continuing. It's never been fixed. There are two visions of America. The Federalists, Hamilton, the common good exceeds the rights of individuals. The nation state, the idea that we're a federal nation state, that things are the same. Americans in California are no different than Americans in Arkansas, or no different from Americans in Maine. Centralized government, a regulated economy. Anti-federalist, Jefferson, the most famous. Individual freedoms are more important than the common good. States' rights are more important. States have the right to do the powers that are granted them under the Constitution and not be regulated. A decentralized government. And lastly, a laissez-faire economy. The idea that the economy runs, we'll make more money, we'll make more wealth if government leaves the economy alone, a deregulated economy. You will recognize those positions as Democrat and Republican. I put anti-federalists on the right for a reason. I put federalists on the left for a reason. This is a fundamental dilemma in American politics today. And it's unresolved today as it was unresolved in 1787. What kind of country do we want? Which is your view of America? And they are competing today in a way they never did before. Is this getting better, staying the same, getting worse in our country? I think it's getting worse. We are moving farther apart on these fundamental issues than we ever did before. So I think it's a political dilemma. I don't see anything changing. I'll wind this up quickly. I don't see anything changing. It's impossible to get an amendment passed today, on either side, if we want one or not. Impossible. It's impossible to amend the Constitution. What if the Democrats abandon the filibuster and they pass voting rights and they pass climate bills and they pass infrastructure and they pass social programs? Do you think it's likely that they won't be immediately the target of lawsuits in 34 red states and sent to the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court we had a pretty good Voting Rights Act from 1964, and the Supreme Court 2 years ago got rid of it. Do you really think that if a new Voting Rights Act goes to the Supreme Court today, that it's going to be upheld? I have my doubts. I really have my doubts. The two Supreme Court cases that are on the docket are on this term, on gun rights New York, concealed carry, and abortion rights, I think will be bellwethers. You will be able to tell after these cases are decided the direction the country will go. And let me end this with settled law. I keep hearing this phrase. I watch, and I try to watch a little bit of Fox. I watch a little bit of MSNBC, and I watch a little bit of CNN. And I hear on CNN and MSNBC the idea of settled law. Look, Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. Settled the law. Separate but equal. Settled. Separate but equal. That held until 1954. And we have Brown versus the Board of Education. And the law was, you pick a word, unsettled, undone, unpackaged, thrown out. But Brown versus Education eliminates separate but equal. So precedent, settled law, whatever the Supreme Court has done in the past, it can undo right now at the 6-3, 5-4, whatever it takes. So what am I watching right now in our government? Those two decisions. And with that, I'm finished. I appreciate your attention, and we have time for, we get this turned off. Questions, comments, your thoughts on the American dilemma? What do you call it?
How did we get to a full-time army?
Hang on just a second. This thing turned off. How did I what?
How did we get to full-time army if it was supposed to only be for 2 years?
The Army?
Well, anybody
yeah.
was
Why 2 years to raise an army? It takes that long. Think in 1787. To bring people together from as far south as Florida and as far north as Maine. Just the simple logistics of moving them to somewhere in the middle where they could train together. How long does it take an army to train? We spent 20 years monkeying around with the Afghans, and they all surrendered. It's complex motions. Now, how long does it take? You have take British people who have never.
Not the question. The question was, when did it go from being militia to we actually got an army?
standing on.
Yeah, let me finish what I was talking about. I misunderstood. Right next to this thing. Back to my first point. How long does it actually take to train an army? If you took a bunch of young men from London, England, and tried to teach them football, American football, how long would that take? How long would it take to train individual skills? 11 players defense, 11 players offense, a couple, in the middle. How long would it take to train them individual skills and then put them together and collectively train them to operate as a team? A long time. That's an army. War is a team sport. Armies are a collective team endeavor. So the 2-year thing is evolved to ensure the army had enough time to come together, get trained, and then be able to go out and fight. When does it change? It changes in 1902. It changes in 1902 when we cross the threshold into the 20th century, and we recognize that we need a peacetime regular army. Why 1902? Well, the Spanish-American War in 1898 has, as a legacy, bequeathed the Philippines on the United States. And immediately this massive Philippine insurrection breaks up. And we actually mobilize some militia units and send them over, but they all have to sign a statement that they're there for X amount of time. So militia usually in our history has simply come together, gone, fight a battle, brought the weapons, put the weapons back in the magazine, and they've all gone home. It was very difficult in our history to have militia from one state fight in another state. We have an enormous problem with George Washington. So in 1902, we have a whole series of laws which form, gets rid of the militia, replaces it with a National Guard, and very strict guidance on National Guard usage. But then basically forms a professional standing army, tiny, small, and it's funded like this. Every year, to this day, Congress has to monkey around with what they call the Defense Appropriations Bill. It was just reaffirmed a week and a half ago. So every year, and usually it's in September because they bicker about it the whole time. And so now we fund the entire Department of Defense annually with a Defense Appropriations Bill. Nobody in 1787 could imagine we have a military structure like we have today. So many people, so much equipment, so many equipments around the world. What would I tell you about the military appropriations bill that just passed? Year after year after year after year after year, the SecDef and DoD submit the budget to Congress. This year, I'm going to make up some numbers that are pretty close, but I can't quite, I didn't write it down, so I've forgotten. The military, DoD, requested something like $730 billion to run procurement, acquisition, paying troops, deployments, heat, lights, food, for the whole DoD for fiscal year 22, which started on 1 October. Congress, every year, increases that. So the military is always given more money than it asked for by Congress. Why is that? Because congressmen in their district have either military bases or they produce things like fighter planes or tanks. You also have those big transports leaving Kabul Airport in August, those C-17 transports. The Air Force, and the initial buy was 240 C-17s. That's all they had room for in terms of pilots and mechanics and hangars and squadrons. So the Air Force reported, we want to buy 240 of these things over a 5-year acquisition bill. Congress made them buy, and the number was 260. Made them buy 20 more than they asked for. Well, they didn't have pilots, they didn't have mechanics, they didn't have money for fuel. It cost something like $120,000 an hour to fly a C-17. When you figure in the acquisition, the spare parts, the crew, the fuel, the pilots, the training. So they took the extra 20, and what did they do with it? They parked them. There's a famous thing called the Boneyard. If you've been to Tucson, Arizona, just outside Tucson is this Davis Mountain Air Base. And it's where we store all the planes we're not using. So there are thousands of aircraft parked.
Yeah, not press it. Press it again now.
Once again, thank you.
One more time. There you go.
There we go. Yeah, it's how we fund the military. It's awesome. Special Forces. This is a weird, just off subject, but 6 years ago, Special Forces all of a sudden started to get boxes of thermal gloves. Very expensive, $500 a pair of thermal gloves, camouflage. And so the Special Forces guys down in Fort Bragg said, where did these come from? We didn't order these. We didn't ask to be funded to get these. And it turns out some congressman in Maine or somewhere in his district, they make these thermal gloves. So the congressman had slid in the appropriation, in the Defense Appropriations Bill for thermal gloves. It's frustrating for them. So that's my take. I'm very, not as a teacher, but as a citizen, I'm very, very discouraged about where we are politically. I don't see a way out. I honestly don't. I thought the filibuster would get rid of it, but then I think, well, with the 6-3 Supreme Court and stuff goes to the Supreme Court, what happens then? I just don't. I don't know if it's worth getting rid of the filibuster to to take that risk. You get rid of the filibuster, you pass the Voting Rights Act. It's immediately brought to court by all of the red states, and it goes to the Supreme Court, and then what happens?
God bless.
Maybe welcome to America.
Oh. It just seems everything's so lopsided, and, when you put, like, women's freedom to choose what they do with their body, it's weighed the same as wearing a mask or not, freedom to wear a mask. I just don't understand how people can just be so, I don't know.
Yeah. The mask mandate is,
I just think everybody's gotta be so extreme, it's gotta be way out here on the left, or way out on the
Crazy.
right. Especially to that point, if we all came to the middle with that, it's where everything, I think, got extreme with it, is when they said, all right, women can have abortions up to 9 months, and what? I think they took it too far.
yeah.
Again, I'm right in the middle with that, so I'm for women's rights. But on the other hand, I don't think they should be having abortions at 9 months, that's just uncalled for, ridiculous.
Right.
If you want to do the 9 months, give the kid up for adoption or something, but gee whiz, to abort a baby at 9 months is too extreme.
There are people in the Republican Party now, they will send out a letter on supporting Democratic candidates in 2022. This is in today's New York Times. And the corollary to that is if this doesn't work to form a third party, given that third parties have never worked very well in America, could that even be possible today? Will a third party, if there's ever a time for a third party, it's today. It's today. The third parties we've had in the past, Al Gore lost because the third party, who's the guy?
Ross Perot was another one.
Ross Perot.
Yeah, Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader basically took out Al Gore. Hillary Clinton was taken out by a third party in 2016. George Bush was taken out by a third party by Ross Perot in 1992. Woodrow Wilson wins in 1912 because Theodore Roosevelt, unhappy with Republicans, formed the Little Moose Party. So they've never worked in the past. But in the past, they've always been fringe parties. They've always been Gore and Clinton, Green and climate kind of parties, Ross Perot, anti-globalization. So they've always been on the fringe. It may be possible now to have one in the center that would attract. No Democrat was attracted to Ross Perot. No Republicans were attracted to Ralph Nader. If we have a center party today, who knows? It's more possible today than ever.
The other thing is, I think that the Democratic Party has got so infiltrated by the Socialist Party. I wish some of those people in the Socialist Party, fine, if you think that's what we want to do, start your own, there again, that would be a third party. I just think that there is that 10-15% in the Democratic Party, there's a lot of good people in the Democratic Party that are just getting buried because we're just listening to the far edge of the socialist people, that this is what we want to do. And that's not what the party wants to do, but they try to hold it together, so,
The progressives have been very successful in capturing a number of Democratic, or a large caucus in the House, which has been identified as a socialist agenda. Parts of it are social. Is it a socialist agenda? Do they advocate public ownership of utilities? Do they advocate many of the socialist things? For example, the great socialist guy in our country was a fellow named Eugene B. Debs, and he was an honest-to-God socialist. Well, the progressives today are some of their ideas are socialist, but they're more properly characterized as Euro ideas. They're ideas that originate in how Europe runs its social programs, not in the socialist ideas of Eugene B. Debs. That's a subject for a whole nother You know, is it the Democratic Party socialist, or is the Republican Party fascist? It's the same argument. There are one or two people in the Republican Party that are probably identifiably fascist. There are probably one or two people in the Democratic Party that are identifiably socialist. But even those extreme wings can't properly be characterized as fascist or socialist. Josh Howell, Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz, are they fascists? No, they're, you know, we can call them fascists if we're Democrats, but they really aren't. So the verbiage is counterproductive. And you're absolutely right. You know, the words themselves are powerful.
My fear is just about the whole concept of the rule of law, in that we're starting to see lots of people, particularly with people like Steve Bannon and people like that, just saying if it doesn't go our direction, we're not gonna go with the rule of law. So whether the Congress, or whether we get an amendment or whatever, if there's a large segment of the population that feels so threatened or empowered in their thinking that they just supersede the law, then all of these things are going and no. So the respect for the authority of law is what I sense and fear is discipline.
Yeah, our State Department pushes what we call rule of law programs. We have one in Mali. We have one in Iraq. We had one in Afghanistan. So the State Department has one of its subsets, one of its divisions that advocates and goes to other countries and tries to persuade them or convince them that the rule of law is an important thing for any representative democracy. And here at home, this is on a lot of people's minds. So what happens if you don't obey the law? You know, what percentage of the public has to change before you activate that change in what Rousseau would call the general will? The general will right now, and here's a good example, the marijuana usage. The federal law, it's illegal. It's illegal. But we have states, and we're on the verge of this right now in New York State. We basically nullified Oregon and California and other places. The general will has changed. You know, so people not only as individuals violate the law, but systemically our state governments violate the law by nullifying federal law. You know, the general will has changed. That's infectious. Once it starts with one thing, who knows where it goes? You know, the general will is changing on a lot of things. I'm not sure. I was going to mention another thing. I know Tom had a question, but I was going over the numbers in Congress. There are 100,000 more people in NY 22. We have one congressperson than there are in Wyoming. Wyoming has 2 senators and 1 congressperson, Liz Cheney. NY 22, Brindisi lost, now we have Claudia. We have 100,000 more people in our congressional district than they have in the whole state of Wyoming. So I used to think that okay, I knew the Senate was kind of lopsided. You know, Wyoming with 580,000 people, New York with almost 20 million, 21 million. Senators, 2 each, but even in the House of Representatives, some of these small states, like Wyoming, are overrepresented in both houses, not just the Senate. Something that hadn't occurred to me until I was kind of working the numbers on some of this stuff. Tom, I know you have a question.
You made reference to originalism in the terms of
interpreting the Constitution, I continue to be puzzled by originalism. A basic tenet of the so-called originalist interpretations, I understand it, would be that blacks are still 60% of a person. That's the original, they're what they were allotted in the Constitution. And it seems as though the originalist, a basic principle of the originalist is that there's no opening to the Constitution changing with time. You mentioned that who could have, if you had the blunderbuss or whatever, how do you factor that in with a fighter jet or whatever? The world has changed, and how can you keep the same originalist view of what is constitutional and not constitutional without factoring in all the rest of the societal changes?
In my view, originalism is a sham. Just for that reason, it doesn't work because of what Tom just said. This is an anecdotal story. Constitution Day, every year I try to chronicle, Scalia would come down and give a speech on Constitution Day. And we had to get the faculty together before we got to meet Scalia. So I posed the direct question to Justice Scalia. I said, you're originalist. What about the elastic clause? Now, if you ask any 11th grader before the Regents what the elastic clause is, they'll say it's the amendment that says Congress, the article in Congress, the part of the Constitution that says Congress can do, and the phrase is what's necessary and proper to enact the Constitution. That's called the elastic clause, and that's in every social studies textbook in the country. Scalia looked at me and he says, I don't know what the elastic clause is. He actually said that. I don't know what the elastic clause is. And I said, okay, well, back to originalism. We have an Air Force. The Air Force was part of the Army until 1947. How can, under a doctrine of originalism, we have a U.S. Air Force? We can have a Navy, we can have an Army. Period. That's it. The Marine Corps is actually part of the Navy. So how would an originalist interpret the unification and independence of the United States Air Force in 1947? He looked at me and he smiled and he said, the exact quote, if you think I'm going to get in a pissing contest with the Air Force, you're crazy. So my view of originalism based on those conversations lead me to believe that originalism is a sham. It's a useful tool. It's a useful tool to write an opinion using interpretations of what the words say or what the individual writing interpretation believes the intent is. Yeah, but it's a good question. They couldn't imagine, if you said to Tom Jefferson, tell me what an American citizen is. Tell me what an American citizen is who's enfranchised to vote. And he would have said, a white property owner, male. He couldn't imagine. Jefferson could never imagine that women could vote. He never imagined that slaves would be freed and citizens would vote. He never imagined that gender would be a structural impediment to some people. These are not things that were part of the world. Historians try to consider this. We have a phrase called zeitgeist, the spirit of the times. And what historians try to do is to put context. Was Jefferson a racist? Well, he was slaves. He had illegitimate children in the South. But does that make him a racist? That term did not exist in 1787. That concept did not exist in 1787. We as historians, we try not to impose our modern definitions and sensibilities on historical figures. It's hard. It's hard to do.
Part of the Constitution is not establishing religion, but in fact we have. It's called Americanism, and there's a sacred document that people want to make sacred, and that's this Constitution. That's why they can point back to the Constitution and say it's original, because it is a sacred document of Americanism. And that's part of the problem. It is not a sacred document. It's an operating manual. Operating manual is version 1 through 287. But that's not how it's being treated. It's being treated.
Yeah, it's being treated as holy script, and it's being treated as mythic holy script that is immutable. It was designed to change. The elastic clause, in my mind, is positive proof. The fact that they have amendments as Article 7, and how to do that indicates to me that they expected it to change. This was all in parade. Nobody had done this before. We had a republic different than the Roman Republic. They had a parliament in England, but they didn't have interlocking parts like we did. So this really was an experiment. The remarkable thing is that they got so much of it right. It doesn't work well. It's obstructive. I think we got about 10 minutes left. The remarkable thing is that in the absence of a model, there was no model they could fall back on. Nobody had anything like this, and they just, from scratch, created this stuff. One last question, sir.
It's not a question, it's an observation that religion and politics are very, very running very similar parallel universes, because they have what's called originalism, like what Scalia does. Then you take the old script and you say, oh, this is the way it should be operating. So if you're not flexible moving with time of what's going on, then you get stuck in the old days.
Yeah.
You're supposed to go in the square and stone somebody or do all kind of funny stuff.
So I'm going to end with that thought that you just brought up. I was thinking about this, and I have another slide on this, but if you have a mom and pop store, that business model, that doesn't work anymore. The factory of 1787 ran on water power and it had 1,000 people to make linens. That model doesn't work anymore. And this is exactly true. Just because it was this way then, and you confer mythic qualities on it, doesn't make it right for today. You couldn't run a modern factory today like they ran factories in 1940. You can't run a family farm today like they ran family farms in 1960. So things do change, and business changes, churches change, people change, the government has to change, and with that, thank you for your attention. I have more people here than I was hoping for, and thank you for coming. Thank you.
Yeah, seriously. Unwind it.
So that's an Erickson hall.
My views, I'm scared. Have a good night.
Take care of Norwich? Lori Collins. Oh, okay, Hi, Dan.
I'm class of nowhere.
Well, no class. Well, you guys have this fun together.
What did you think, Missy? You came to a smile while you're leaving the press.
No, we met in second grade. We just happened to be in the same place.
It was an insurrection because of what reason?
Anyhow, we need to get out for a beer one of these days. Ed will drive. Ed will drive.
So
you guys are gonna take care of it. I don't want, Frank, Joanne,
Is it a rebellion, is it an insurrection?
Don't wanna see it, but-
I know the timing, I mean, she just sprung it on us two days ago, and I said, you know, we tried to avoid these. I tried to give her. Now, if you guys wanna, if the weather's great, we can all sit down. Now you just show up at 4 o'clock, and I plan to put out some cheese and crackers, and we'll have wine and whatever. So, yeah, you wanna come down?
Wanting to defund the police, would you define that as
Well,
an
they don't
insurrection?
That's gotta be a
Project,
point.
yeah, there's cases.
We arranged this. We arranged it because we
You're not
were
sure
tied
of
up
that,
for a day
because the police
until 4
represent the
o'clock, so
government.
that's why it's
And I'm like, hey, I said, yeah, I always wanted to do it, so.
Trying to
Sort of
get lots of other
I
issues.
personally,
Right,
around
it
the wall,
does.
sort of-
A lot of-
insurrection is probably
Yeah.
just on January 6th.
Right, and then gathering everybody up in a
The
4-day.
riot is
Right, that's the other
That's the
part.
other part.
We don't have stuff's happening. People
Yep.
have things set up.
Schedule.
That's
Places
the
are
argument
always-
is because when I looked at the year before, I was like,
Right.
or even.
So when we
the year
get past
before
all of
that,
this,
when
we
they,
can
what was that
we got to
movie?
Arizona and we'll be back
The
at
black
the end of the
gentleman was
month.
shot by
Then
the
we'll
police
talk
as
about
he
the
was
road
going
race.
into the car and
We're leaving on
the riot
Wednesday,
really going.
Wednesday the
Right.
20th.
Or they were just sort of getting things started.
Then
No, I'm just thinking of time.
people accept that.
And then when we get back, we'll
Represented
call you up
something
and we'll jump in the
those
car
people,
and Ed
much
can drive
as
because he doesn't drink.
any other citizen.
Right.
All right, enjoy. Thanks for coming, guys.
To not accept, accept states
Right.
and to call for new elections out here.
It was fun, actually, for Carol, once he was at the hospital.
scary.
So that's how I sort of got wind of part of this.
But insurrection, you know, it's
And
certainly
I actually
not
worked with her
not an
years
insurrection
ago.
in classic terms.
Yeah.
And how we normally
Right.
you think more insurgents.
In the 70s with the movement against Vietnam, was that an insurrection or was that a riot?
Yeah, I think mass demonstrations and then some of those turned into riots.
Yeah, because I know years ago when we walked up there, a couple times when we
None of those
we actually
demonstrators
took a
thought
hike
they
with
could.
a bunch of kids that wanted to go on a hike after school. We did a trip up there, we had camping.
Yeah, I think
We
changed.
hope to make that a more inviting.
But I do know that anytime I walk up there, 'cause I'd like to go up there and just take pictures.
There was a couple on.
He had to go up to like Bob Goodrich's thing.
Desegregation.
This is like the last house on that place. But I,
Have you ever been through the roadway?
We just decided.
we did something with a couple of science teachers, like in
Yeah,
eighth
yeah.
grade, and we took a bus up there. Probably on that back road when we walked in, but boy, at that point,
But that's what we're doing.
I don't know how far in they went. They kind of just pulled in the road and walked in. It was a nature hike.
We've heard stories about it.
That ain't happening.
Anyways, so I'm happy to add your name to
Really?
the email. Do you want to give me your email?
I could never imagine the founders of the Muslims.
I can remember what email, I'm more likely to see that immediately.
Are you still working together?
Oh, yeah. 28 years, and I've done hammered up there. Being a, what's called, and one of the guys that was all the wiring for the, everything up there. The data network, the phone network, the nurse call network, the PA system, the Wi-Fi system. Oh, no, it's all brand new, brand new, I mean, because they basically built that, so it's all brand new.
Is wired, hardwired in, or is it?
Yeah. You can't put Wi-Fi, the joke is you can't get Wi-Fi without wire.
We're out. I'm sure it's interesting. I don't want to. I know, we have to walk. I know.
When you're running wire down the hall. Or the other thing is, no, we're putting in
So
space.
I'm concerned. This whole concept of rule of law, okay, is being put into question, and so-called ordinary citizens.
I don't recall, are you aware of that?
And
is that.
Dad just turned 88, mother's 85.
Yes. Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Well, we need to do more in terms of figuring out ways of helping people to get involved with this. We've had a number of people ask how do we volunteer to do things, and I don't think we have really have.
Yeah, 'cause I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of work up there that anybody can do.
Yeah.
Whether it's a rake or a weed whacker or a lawnmower
Right.
or whatever it is.
Good evening.
Hello,
How are you?
not trying to be rude, but
Yeah.
you need to lock up.
I didn't remember you worked here.
Oh, yeah, I've been here for about 5 years.
Okay, and are you full-time?
No, just 17 and a half hours a week.
Okay, well, very good.
Thank you. Monday,